In October 2018, I built my first project from this shop. And today, I will build my last and final project from this shop. And I'm not quitting YouTube or anything like that. I'm just moving to a new shop. And I'll talk more about that later. That said, with this being my last project, I want to do something special. So to help me figure out what that something special would be, I decided to look back at everything that I've built from this shop. 157 videos in total. I thought, maybe I could take inspiration from one of the gimmicky pieces, or maybe the project that got the most views. What about the project that got the least views? Or maybe just my favorite project. All fine ideas. But the more that I thought about it, the most obvious idea was to close the circle by revisiting the very first project that I built here. This nightstand with wireless charging. Now, before you say anything, let me go ahead and say what you're thinking out loud. That's what you want to build for your final project? Well, in a word, no. And in 15, I'm not going to rebuild that piece. I'm going to build something much, much cooler. So let me walk you through where things started and where things will ultimately end. Thank you to Shopify for sponsoring this video. More on that later. The year was 2018. We just had our second kid. I had just quit my 9-to-5 job to go full-time with all this woodworking stuff. And I had just moved from making videos in our 2-car garage to this giant workshop. And like I just said a couple seconds ago, the first project that I built from this shop was this nightstand. And if I'm being totally honest, I wouldn't say that it's terrible looking, but it's probably not going to win any awards either. It's just fine. It's an okay looking nightstand. So when I thought about revisiting it, naturally my first idea was to just fix the things about it that bugged me. And there are two things. First is that the proportions just feel off. To me, it looks top heavy. And second, and this one's a little bit harder to explain, but you know when a little kid draws a picture of a person and it kind of looks like the arms and legs all come out directly from the head? Well, to me, this kind of feels like the nightstand version of that. So I gave it a little bit more visual weight down low and added a neck. And I like this more, but still wasn't really what I was hoping for this project. The more I thought about it, the more I just wanted to try something different. Something that people will notice when they see it. A statement piece. So I kept coming up with ideas, and right around here is when something changed. And I'm not even saying that I like this piece. I mean, this one kind of reminds me of like an octa stuffed Oreo or something. But this sent me down a path which eventually led to this one. And this was the first piece that I got serious about building. And maybe I will someday, but not today. Because the thing that it got me excited about was just the overall shape, this sort of 7 shape. I thought that a pair of these flanking a bed could look really cool. So then I thought, well, what if I just built a nightstand that looks like a 7? So at this point in the video, I'm curious about what you imagine the nightstand that I'm going to build is going to look like. And as much as I wish I could stop the video and ask all of you in real time, I can't. So I did the next best thing. I had ChatGPT create a profile for a fake person who it thinks represents my average viewer. And it came up with Ryan. I'll tell you more about him later. But for now, what's important is I wanted Ryan to guess what he thinks I'm building based on what he knows so far. So I gave him all the exact same information that you've heard up until this point, and I described what's been on screen, which has basically just been me cutting a bunch of rough walnut into smaller pieces of various sizes. And Ryan's a pretty literal guy, I guess, because he thinks I'm building a literal 7. Now, I'll admit he's not that far off, but obviously building a nightstand that looks exactly like a 7 wouldn't really work all that well. First, I'd like to be able to store a couple of items somewhere in a cubby or a drawer or something. And second, and more important, I don't think this would stand up. Plus, I actually think we can make it look cooler than that. Also, even though Ryan can't tell, you can probably tell that I have way too many pieces here to build something like he described. So while Ryan might not be the best at guessing, he actually is pretty representative of my audience as far as I can tell. I mean, he's a guy, and he's 34, which seems to track. And apparently he's not subscribed. Right, what the f***, man? You don't appreciate these videos that I pour my soul into and that you get to watch for free? Whatever. You know, to all the real people watching, don't be like Ryan. Go ahead and get subscribed. All right, let's get back on track. So, first order of business. I identified 3 potential problems, and I'm going to start tackling those one by one. So for storage, I don't really need or want much. Really only the things that I'll reach for constantly. We're talking like whatever book I'm currently reading, a small remote, and my pool torpedo. And if you guys have never played with a pool torpedo, super fun. I mean, just look at that thing go. Highly recommend. Anyway, one of the upsides here is that I think addressing the storage issue could actually help with the tipping over and looking better issues. I mean, I guess the looks are subjective, but objectively, this would have a lower center of gravity, right? Smart people, go ahead and weigh in on that. And in the meantime, I'll just keep working. So what you see me doing here is creating a template, which I'm going to use to shape the top section of the nightstand. And the way I'm going to do that is by creating 9 copies of this shape in walnut. And each of these is going to be about 1.5 inches thick so that I end up with a nightstand that's about 13.5 inches deep. One other thing to mention is that I'm not going to make these assemblies out of one piece. Each one is going to be made out of 3 pieces like this. And that's for 2 reasons. First, if I were to make it like this, it would have a weak spot in the grain right here where the fibers become really short. Probably not an issue on this piece if I'm being honest. But I'm kind of considering the design for this piece as an experiment that, if it works, I could see using on much larger, heavier pieces of furniture. So I'd rather just do it right from the start. And then the second reason is that making it out of multiple pieces will allow me to use a lot less material because I don't have all this wasted space in the center. Hang on. Wait a minute. Well, whatever, it's still stronger. So what I'm doing here is cutting out a bunch of blocks and strips so that I can glue up my assembly. And the idea is I glue up a clunky assembly like this and then shape it using that template that I just made. Okay, so that covers the storage. And now you know what the top half of the nightstand is going to look like. But I still haven't shown what the bottom half is going to look like and how we're going to keep this thing from tipping over. So again, I would be curious to know what you think the bottom half is going to look like at this point. And again, since I can't do that, let's tap Ryan back in to see where his head is. I gave him all the information and showed him this picture. And I wasn't expecting him to nail it, and I mean, yeah, that's a statement piece, all right. People are going to notice that when they walk in a room. Probably not for good reasons, but they'll notice. Anyway, here's the actual idea. So we already know that this piece won't stand on its own, and neither would this piece or any of these pieces. But if we stack them all together like this, then I think it might. And this is the reason that when I first stumbled onto this design, it was the one that got me excited. Like I said, I'm thinking of this piece more as an experiment. And if it works well, I could see myself trying all kinds of pieces that use this same idea. Tables, media consoles, maybe a bed, who knows? So that's the idea. And before I get too far ahead of myself, I should probably just focus on this one and make sure that it works. So what do you think? Will it stand? Thankfully, this time Ryan can sit it out because I actually conducted a poll a few months back when I first had this idea, and 54% of you say it'll stand. You know, actually for fun, let's just ask Ryan. Hey, Ryan, here's a picture of what I'm actually building. Do you think this will stand? Okay, Ryan just responded, and he gave me a super long response that I don't really want to sit here and read. But at the end, he said that he could tweak it to be safer while keeping the 7 vibe. And sure, I'll bite. What do you got? Again, guys, don't be like Ryan. Get subscribed. Anyway, polls and AI are good and all, but to get a better idea, I decided to turn to a different technology, 3D printing. All right, so I made a file, and then my buddy, Sean Boyd, made this. And it stands. I mean, honestly, in this direction, I feel like you could put a ton of weight on it. Like you could probably park a car on it. You could probably park a car on it. But I think the real question people are going to have is how's it going to handle weight? Not so much in the center right there, but on the corners. I'm sure somebody that's smarter than me could test this and, I don't know, like scale it to determine the answer. But I'm just going to keep building it and find out that way. So let's go back to that. Eight. As you know, this is going to be my last video in this shop. So some of you might be wondering, where are you going? Well, here's a little sneak peek. Same Chris, just in a world that's a little more gritty. It's like the Dark Knight reboot of Four Eyes Furniture. So then that might have you wondering, why are you moving? And it comes down to two factors. First is money. Long story short, it was never my intention to have this shop all to myself. When I first moved in, I was working out of a small corner that was hardly bigger than the 2-car garage that I came from. And the rest of the space was being used as a warehouse by my friend Jason. But over the years, a lot changed. Jason moved out, Sean moved in, then Sean moved out. And for about the past 2 years, it's been just me. And since then, I've kind of known that the writing was on the wall. I mean, I love this space, and being here changed my life. But it's just a little expensive for just me. And that takes us to the other factor, working alone. Now, I actually really like working alone, but not all of the time. I would say I tend to work about 70 hours a week, and even in my new situation, probably half of those will be alone. So I'm still gonna get all the alone time that I want. But it's also nice to be able to go grab lunch with somebody or have a hand flipping a slab. And if, God forbid, something bad happens, I like the idea of other people being around. So those are the reasons. You just saw me label my leg pieces 1 through, well, I would say 9, but I guess 1 through 5 twice. And then you saw me cutting an angle on the top of each piece. And the idea here is that the pieces that have the same number are identical. That way, when I assemble everything, it's like a mirror from front to back. Then when I was on the bandsaw, I was just cutting out a little spot where I could attach a clamp. And that whole thing will eventually get cut off because I'm going to leave everything oversized while I attach them to the tops. By the way, this hammer that you're going to see me using here, this is a prototype that I've been working on that I think looks really cool. I mean, it's a little rough here since it's a prototype, but you get the basic idea. But anyway, after I got it in hand, I like using it. And like I said, I like the direction in terms of the looks, but it just kind of seems like a goofy product, more of like a souvenir than an actual tool that people would want to use. I mean, you could say the exact same thing about the brass chunky mechanical pencil, but I don't know, there's just something different about a pencil falling into that category than a hammer. If you have a strong opinion, go ahead and let me know. But as of now, I'm kind of leaning towards putting that one on the back burner in order to develop some of the other ideas that I think might be better. And I always have to remind myself about being picky about what projects I pursue, because I mean, there's only so many hours in the day. So anywhere I can save time or take something off my plate is huge for me. And that brings me to quite possibly the least subtle segue you'll hear today into this video's sponsor, Shopify. Yes, Shopify is the sponsor of this video, but I've actually been using them since I first launched Quirk, way before they were ever a sponsor. Now, a lot of people think of Shopify as just a website builder. And yeah, you can absolutely design and build a website with it. But I think the right way to think of them is more as an entire toolkit for entrepreneurs, packed with everything that they would need to launch and grow a business. Basically, they took the stuff that used to take a whole team of people with super specialized skills to utilize, and now people like me not only have access to it, but can actually take advantage of the tools and run and grow their businesses. Lately, I've been messing around with a new tool called Sidekick. It's basically like having an expert user at your disposal 24/7. Here you can see me asking it to create a discount code for a hypothetical sale that I'm having this weekend, and it'll fully implement it. Then I asked if it could create a banner that I could use on my website to go with the sale. Did that too. But I wanted to make it match the look of my site better, which is kind of black, white, and teal. It's pretty crazy. And this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what it's capable of. If you have a business or are thinking of starting one, you should really check out Shopify. And right now you can start a free trial. Just head over to shopify.com/4eyes. All right, Thanks, Shopify. By the way, that hammer that I'm thinking about not making, I showed Ryan this picture of the pencil and asked him to help me come up with a hammer version, and he came up with this. Again, Ryan is a very literal guy. But then I asked him to name it, and he came up with the Brass Thumpy. Here's the weird part though. That's a name that I had already written down on my own back when I was designing the hammer, which, wait a minute. Am I the Ryan? No. Anyway, now we can move on to assembling this thing and seeing how sturdy it is. Well, actually, I couldn't help myself. I wanted to test just one piece to see how sturdy it was. And on its own, it stands, but yeah, not that sturdy. Okay, so right now, all the pieces are shaped, but they're all still long at the bottom. And I need to trim them so that when it's assembled, everything matches nice and flush on the bottom. The problem is that because each shape is unique, they all have like just slightly different angles and they're all slightly different lengths. So you might think that the solution would be to somehow measure and mark everything super precisely, but it's actually the opposite. Don't measure or mark anything at all. I know that I want the nightstand to be 24 inches tall, and I know that in order to function, the feet have to be parallel with the top. So I can just set the fence on my table saw to 24 inches, cut each one, and they should end up perfect. The only slight problem with that is that this cut is kind of sketchy to make on a table saw because it's so much wider than it is long. But I feel confident that if I concentrate on keeping good pressure on the fence here, it should be totally safe. But just know that and maybe don't try this one at home and just be safe. All right, so while building this nightstand, I've been reflecting on my time here and some of my favorite projects that have come from this shop. I'm not going to do a top 10 list or anything like that, but I just wanted to mention a few that popped into my head. So, in the category for best gimmick project, the crayon tables. Now I'm just going to lump all three of them together, but if I had to pick one, I would say that this was my favorite. And gimmick projects always walk a fine line between tacky and clever, but I think thankfully these ones landed on the right side and they were fun to build. Now on the flip side of that coin, for worst gimmick project, I'm going to go with this little shelf that I built that kind of looks like it's floating. Now I think I did a decent job of making it look like it's floating at a quick glance. I just think that it's not really an effect that I'm all that excited about having on my furniture. Okay, I'll point out a few other highlights and lowlights as I think of them. But for now, as you can clearly see, I'm assembling everything. And I would say that this is all pretty straightforward. I put a few dominoes along the top and back edge to help align everything and keep the pieces from sliding around while I'm clamping them. And as you can see here, I'm having to do this in a few steps, where I'm starting with pairs, then doing quads, and then finally I'll put it all together. And I guess that leaves us time for another highlight, lowlight. So how about for best in trying a new technique, the sneaker display shelf. So the technique was wood bending, and I haven't done much or I think any of it since. But I personally really like this project. I mean, I would give it an A- maybe for its ability to display sneakers in a cool and interesting way. Unfortunately, I'm also going to give it the award for worst in trying a new technique because as a YouTube view getter, I'd have to give it an F+. It just turns out there's not that big of an audience for this kind of project. Okay, we got a good news, bad news situation. The good news is, after getting this thing assembled, it's actually quite a bit more sturdy than I had imagined. So at this point, I feel pretty confident that we're going to end up with a functioning nightstand. The bad news is, let's back up a bit. So a lot of you might have noticed this already, but for example, you see in this shot how there are certain times where one of my work pieces will sit flat on one end, but not on the other. Well, here's me poorly trying to explain what had happened on camera. Rotational forces. But I think I can do a better job here. So back when I assembled those three pieces that made up the top assemblies, I didn't put any dominoes or dowels into these joints because from a strength perspective, I just didn't feel like it needed it. But the other thing that using dowels or dominoes would have done was help to prevent these pieces from being able to twist while the glue was drying. So as you can probably guess, a few of the pieces dried slightly off. And we're talking like a single degree here, but 1 degree over here can translate into a huge difference down on the other end. And unfortunately, that means when you try to bring everything together, there's going to be gaps. Now, I knew this pretty early on in the build, but I was hoping that I could just get rid of the gaps by using brute force. And I used a lot of clamps, but I still ended up with a few gaps. So now I have to try to think of something to fix them. So the good news, I guess, is that this is one of those problems that's completely avoidable next time. And with this piece being more of an experiment, I mean, I'm not going to sell it or anything. I figured that this would be a good time to get experimental with a solution. Now, this is going to sound crazy, but what I did was introduce a low frequency micro vibration tuned to the natural resonant frequency of walnut. And this should cause the lignin bonds to realign and essentially walk the joint closed. I'm messing with you. That was just Photoshop. Okay, so here's what I actually did. I'm taking the old, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em approach. In other words, I'm going to use my track saw to turn my tiny gaps into larger gaps that are big enough that I can fill them with some wooden strips. Now, realistically, I would say that all but maybe 3 or 4 of the gaps were probably small enough that I could have just gotten away with the glue and sawdust trick. But I think that by doing that and then filling the few that needed it with strips would actually make it more noticeable than just doing all of them. It'll take a little more time, but I feel like it'll come out pretty seamless. So unfortunately, nothing as elegant and scientific as that walnut frequency fix. Just a simple concept and lots of labor. But look at the bright side. That means I can tell you about the winner in the category of, you know what? Let's just go for it. Fan favorite. Actually, I guess let's start with fan unfavorite. So for this one, I'm just going to go with the numbers. The project that got the fewest amount of views. And that would be scrolling. The inedible modern gingerbread house. People like that one about as much as they like eating MDF. Now, in fairness, this is actually my mom's favorite video of mine. No joke. She watches it every December and tells me. So I guess basically if I didn't come from your uterus, then you don't like this one. All right, now the moment that nobody has been waiting for. And here I'm not going to just go with the numbers because then it would be the giant Nintendo Switch followed by this circle coffee table, which is a fine table, but nothing earth-shattering. So instead, I'm going to make it a tie between the 3rd and 4th most popular projects. This circle table and this desk. Even though they didn't get as many views as the other two, I get way more comments and requests from people who either want to buy or build these projects. And I feel pretty comfortable saying that just as projects, they were more beloved by people. Now, I know that I'm taking some liberties here. So if you disagree and think that the Nintendo Switch is the better project, let me know by, I don't know, going and watching the gingerbread house video. No, don't do that. Unless you're my mom, then go ahead and knock yourself out. All right, we're on the final stretch of this one. Last project from this shop. And there's only a couple things left to do. Some roundovers, a lot of sanding, which don't worry, I'm not going to make you watch, and then some finishing. And most important of all, seeing if this thing is actually stable and works as a nightstand. And actually, why don't we go ahead and do that right now? So first things first, how does it handle weight? And if it's weight directly on the top, no problem. Kind of makes me want to come up with a chair design using this technique. But I really don't think that that was ever the concern. It was really more about weight on a corner. Now, if you're like me, when you set a glass of water on your nightstand, you probably aim for this area, better known as the beverage bullseye. And you avoid the perimeter, commonly referred to as the rim of regret. But I want to make sure that those daredevils are covered too. So here I've got my camera with a big lens on it, and I don't know what this weighs, but definitely more than a glass of water. And you can see that even setting it unreasonably close to the edge, it's not going to make the nightstand tip over. And you're probably thinking, well, yeah, that's great. But what about when I want to set down my 40-pound dumbbells? And if you put those right on the very edge, it'll tip. So I would say for reasonably holding objects, it gets a pass. All right, the last test, the bump test. So if you were using this as a side table or a nightstand where it's right next to an object and a wall, you would pretty much have to go out of your way to bump it and knock it over. But what if you live in a minimalist art gallery? I'd say if you get a good head of steam going and you plow right into it, you're going to knock it over. So we'll say pass for most normal situations, but fail if you live in an art gallery with a golden retriever. Okay, now it's time. And I want to give this project and this shop the send-off that it deserves. So, cue the music. In October of 2018, I built my first project from this shop. And today, I built my last. 2,487 days and 157 projects ago. And if you showed that me all the things that I've built here, he'd be pretty damn proud. I spent a lot of time in this shop, and I know that it's just a building, but I'll never forget it. And I like to think a little piece of me will always be here.